She's been called the Oscar Wilde of YouTube, and her videos have been archived by the Library of Congress. I'm talking about ContraPoints, aka Natalie Wynn, who is a transgender ex-philosopher and leading personality of the YouTube left, and who was recently canceled by many on the far left, and who shall be the focus of this episode. If you know her, you need no convincing to stick around. If you don't, stick around anyway, because you're going to be introduced to some fabulous content for your quarantine viewing pleasure, and you just might learn something about your worldview. You are opening the Infinite Lunchbox for a fresh take on what's going on. I'm Stephanie Lepp, and today we're going to get a fresh take on ContraPoints, and specifically how ContraPoints embodies integral philosophy, or how ContraPoints embodies a specific way of thinking that might help her navigate her recently being canceled. Before we dive in, yes, what is integral thinking? Put super simply, integral thinking sees the partial truth in all points of view. So instead of saying, this view is right, all the other views are wrong, integral thinking says all views have some partial truth to them, although some views have more truth than others. Yes, that is still rather abstract. And if you want more meat on the bones now, check out the Infinite Lunchbox episode on integral strategy. I'm wearing purple in the thumbnail. Or trust that it will all make sense as we go along. And with that,
let's get started.
We're going to look at 3 different ContraPoints videos, and we're going to start with Transtrenders. The video begins on the Freedom Report, a debate show hosted by glamorous centrist Jackie Jackson. The contestants are Tiffany Tumbles, a conservative transgender makeup blogger, and Baltimore, Maryland, a liberal gender nonconformist. In terms of the political spectrum, Baltimore is on the far left, Jackie is in the center, and Tiffany is slightly to the right. All of these characters, and all of the characters in all ContraPoints videos, are played by Natalie herself. So in the clip we're about to see, Tiffany Tumbles accuses Baltimore, Maryland of being a transtrender, a derogatory term for someone who doesn't have gender dysphoria, doesn't have the experience of their biological sex not matching their identity, but who calls themselves transgender because they think it's cool. And in response, Baltimore, Maryland asks Tiffany Tumbles if she has ever seen a picture of her brain.
Well, tell me, Tiffany Tumbles, when the doctor prescribed your hormones, did he take a look at your brain then? What? Of course not. But you have seen a scan of your brain, yes? Well, no. Where are you going with this? I mean, if you've never seen your brain and the doctor who diagnosed your gender dysphoria didn't look at it, then tell me, Tiffany Tumbles, how do you know that you have a female brain? Well, shit. That's a good point. No, it isn't. Look, there's scientific studies. Can you explain to me the difference between a male brain and a female brain? Are they different colors? I'm not an expert, but there's science showing that men and women have brain differences. I see, but your doctor never looked at your brain. So how did he know that you have gender dysphoria? Well, he asked me questions and I told him about it. And you told him what exactly? That I experienced gender dysphoria. So would you agree then that your gender dysphoria, and therefore your identity, is valid not because of any observed facts about your brain, but because of your feelings? Well, congratulations, Attorney Frankenfurter. You backed me into a corner. Sure, it's because of my feelings of gender dysphoria. So, tell me, Tiffany Tumbles, why is it that your feelings about your gender are valid, but mine, according to you, are not? This burgeoning brick.
And after Tiffany Tumbles appears on the Freedom Report, she visits her friend Justine. also a transgender woman who is left of Tiffany, but more moderate than Baltimore. And here, Tiffany and Justine are arguing about how to validate transgender identity.
We live in a world of Jackie Jacksons who don't understand trans people and don't think we're real. So we need to have an explanation of what it is to be trans that's based on facts and not feelings. And the most factual explanation is transmedicalism, which is the idea that transsexualism is a diagnosable mental disorder called gender dysphoria. There's science to back this up, it's accepted by medical professionals, and it clearly explains why we are valid, unlike Rachel Dolezal and snowflake gender teenagers and people who identify as cats. Okay, I see the appeal, but I don't think transmedicalism is as validating as you think it is. Why not? I'll put it bluntly. Why does having gender dysphoria make you a woman? Because gender dysphoria means I have a female brain. No, it doesn't. I'm sorry to tell you, but the science does not say what you think it says. There may be neurological causes of gender dysphoria, but at the end of the day, all dysphoria is discomfort in a male body or a male social role or however you want to put it. And wanting to be a woman is not the same thing as being a woman. Not by any means. Girl, where are you going with this? What is this? Are you becoming a TERF? No, I just don't think your theory actually validates our womanhood. Well, if you're right, that's a real problem, because we need to have reason and science and logic and facts on our side so that we can explain to society that we are valid and that we are real. Otherwise, bad things. Well, maybe there's a better theory. Well, okay, Socrates, let's hear it then. The way I see it, gender is either psychological or biological or social. Now, my friend Tabby, the cat girl, she thinks it's all psychological, that it's just identity, that whatever you think about your own gender is true. And that makes me really uncomfortable, because then what's the difference between identifying as a woman and identifying as a Norwegian forest cat? It's a difference that Tabby herself seems not to have much of a grip on. Girl, that's literally what I've been trying to tell you about Transtrenders this entire time. Just let me finish. If gender is strictly biological, then that's game over for trans people, unless you make some kind of wrong brain in the wrong body argument, but I told you I'm not buying that. So that leaves gender as a social construct. Are you gonna try to make me read Judith Butler again? I'll summarize it. Gender is a series of gestures. It's called performativity. It's the way you dress, it's the way you speak, it's the way you act, it's the way you relate to other people. Through transitioning, we habituate to the gestures of womanhood, and socially, that makes us women, regardless of biology or psychology. Checkmate transphobes. Okay, the problem with that is that it's both too exclusionary and too inclusive. It excludes a lot of trans people who can't transition for circumstantial reasons, but whose dysphoria is very real. And it includes every transtrender, drag queen, fetishist, and 2-bit cross-dressing comedian in a Dinah wig. Well, do you really believe that a man who plays a woman on stage becomes just as much of a woman as you and me? Yes? Bitch, no you don't. Yeah, you're right. I'm full of shit.
So what are we looking at here? Well, in general, people, including Natalie Wynn herself, conceive of what she's doing in scenes like this as enacting your typical Socratic dialogue, because she's using dialogue between different characters to show how one of them is right. For example, how Baltimore, Maryland is right that there's no physical brain trait and therefore no biological basis for gender dysphoria. But I would say that these multi-character dialogues aren't just Socratic, they are integral. Because ContraPoints shows how all the characters have some degree of rightness. Baltimore, Maryland is right that gender dysphoria is not biological. Justine is right that gender is neither biological nor psychological but social, and specifically performative. And Tiffany Tumbles is right that a performance-based definition of gender dysphoria is too narrow and too broad, because it excludes people who can't afford to transition and includes every single drag queen. In traditional Socratic dialogue, one character's views are shown to be inconsistent, and that character is usually represented by a straw man. Whereas ContraPoints uses strong men, or strong women, or strong gender nonconforming people, to illustrate the strongest version of every view in order to show the partial truth in every view, while showing which view has the most comprehensive truth. And this capacity to see the partial truth in all views while seeing the most comprehensive truth in one or a few views is a hallmark of integral thinking. And I suspect that the, shall we say, integral chorus that emerges from the dialogue between the different characters actually best represents the views of Natalie herself. Moving on to video number 2, the aesthetic. Here we're going to see Tabby, a transgender social justice warrior and a member of Antifa. And again, we're going to see Justine, also a trans woman, this time with her makeup on right, and this time much more moderate in her views relative to Tabby. And in this next clip, Tabby and Justine are arguing about the most effective way to advocate for transgender rights.
The smashing has got to stop. I mean, with the Nazis, it's one thing, but you cannot be menacing radical feminists with a bat. I wouldn't have to smash if literally anyone else were willing to stick up for us. Your delicate notion of femininity is a product of the privilege you share with a lot of thin, white, cis feminists. Wow, it must be so hard for you out on the streets as a fat woman of color. Shut up. I'm just saying, don't claim a struggle that isn't yours, girl. You could have what I have. You just have to work for it instead of playing this part of the tragic victim. You were raised a white boy. You got to go to college and learn all that philosophy. And yeah, it's hard being a trans woman of any background, but you still stand on a lot of privilege. I look at all the photos of trans women who are murdered in this country, and they don't look like you or me. Why don't you use your privilege and use your education to actually do some good in the world instead of this elective, revolutionary LARPing? You make me sound like the self-indulgent one. I'm sorry I'm not hard-working enough to go to brunch dates and cocktail parties with transphobes. I've seen minds change and hearts soften before my eyes. You don't win friends and allies with a bat. They're just using you. Well, who do you think benefits and who do you think gets hurt when you go out into the world and represent trans women as masculine and violent? Who do you think benefits when they trot you out to be feminine and meek and acquiescent? I guess we can't win, can we? You want to just chill out and watch YouTube videos? Yeah, okay.
Want to just chill out and watch YouTube videos? Yeah, because there was no definitive winner to that debate. ContraPoints puts a stake in the ground on the need to fight for transgender rights, but she doesn't take a definitive position on the best strategy for doing that, whether aggressively fighting for it Tabby style or conforming to existing gender norms, Justine style. And not taking a definitive, always true stance is something ContraPoints often does, which her audience often struggles with, and is also a hallmark of integral thinking, which values flexibility and spontaneity and functionality. Chilling out and watching YouTube videos in this case, and sometimes not taking one definitive position in general, allows ContraPoints to hold all partial truths and adapt to circumstances as they evolve. Video number 3, and perhaps the sexiest example of ContraPoints embodying integral philosophy, is her not takedown, but seduction of right-wing public intellectual Jordan Peterson. In this clip, ContraPoints is able to concede Peterson's valid points while critiquing the ones she takes issue with.
So Dr. Peterson, Professor, Daddy, let's talk. And for once, I'd like to actually treat this discussion with the seriousness and respect I think it deserves. That's good. It's good temperature. Hand me the oil, would you, Daddy? Thanks, Daddy. It's really an honor to bathe with a public intellectual of your stature. You know, I never like to argue in the bath, so I want to start by telling you the things I like about you. The first thing is that I think some of your criticisms of the left, the stifling of even slightly different opinions, the gratuitous loathing of Western cultural monuments, the politics of resentment, are, within a certain mediocre corner of academia, valid complaints. I even made a video about that a long time ago when I was a different person. Oh god, the dysphoria, please don't watch it. But my worry is that you're leading an international political backlash against what is a very localized problem, and I worry that some of our society's most vulnerable people could be hurt by that backlash. Like, fine, you hate postmodern intellectuals and overly sensitive student activists, but if your backlash also targets gender equality, LGBT acceptance, and civil rights, that would be bad, right?
Here, ContraPoints makes the integral move of transcending the excesses of the left, the stifling of even slightly different opinions, the gratuitous loathing of Western cultural monuments, the politics of resentment, while including the fruits of the left, like its orientation towards gender equality and LGBT acceptance and civil rights. This capacity to transcend and include is yet another hallmark of integral thinking, and when applied to the left, makes ContraPoints less of a fit with the traditional integral world and its founding father Ken Wilber, and more of a fit with the emerging integral left, which marries integral thinking with progressive politics. Her quintessentially integral capacity to transcend and include is also why ContraPoints is better at critiquing the left than the right is. And in this case, than Jordan Peterson is. Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web are stuck regurgitating the same blanket critiques of the left, while ContraPoints is able to make more exacting critiques of the regressive and establishment left while maintaining the fruits of the progressive and new left. Ultimately, the capacity to transcend and include allows ContraPoints to keep her eyes on the prize, which is not to destroy the other side, but to incorporate more partial truths into a more holistic integration that more people can get on board with. There are so many more examples and cases and arguments I could make for how ContraPoints embodies integral philosophy, and if you're curious, leave a comment and I'll elaborate. But as someone who also came to integral through the back door, I used to call myself a promiscuous pragmatic pluralist until I learned there was an entire body of philosophy around that way of thinking. I shall instead rest my case and turn to the critical question of, so what? So what if ContraPoints embodies integral philosophy? How does it help her and her audience, and possibly you, to know that? Well, in various ways. Number one, knowing she embodies integral can help ContraPoints navigate her recent canceling. For a casting decision she made, and you can learn about this entire saga in her canceling video, ContraPoints was recently ostracized by much of what she'd considered to be her community on the internet left. And so, where does she go from here? Where might she find a welcoming political home? Or perhaps second home? She still has an enormous audience, almost 900,000 subscribers and counting, and yet I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I think ContraPoints would find an equally social justice oriented but less cancel trigger happy and more philosophically aligned home on the integral left, which again marries progressive politics with integral philosophy. Number two, integral philosophy can help ContraPoints take her arguments further. For example, in What's Wrong with Capitalism Part 2, ContraPoints does a fine job of critiquing capitalism, but falls short of envisioning an alternative.
Part 1, which you've all been waiting for. How to end capitalism once and for all. Well, I don't know. Who do you people think I am? I'm a socially conscious YouTube entertainer, not transsexual Gandhi. I mean, according to Marxism, we can't just start the revolution whenever we feel like it. Capitalism has to fail, and that'll bring about the conditions that make revolution inevitable. So I guess we just try to relax and wait for that to happen. I'm sure it's bound to happen any day now. You know, maybe we should do something in the meantime. So, I don't know, I guess vote Labor, tweet radically, try to eat more vegetables, try not to be manipulated into waging war against other downtrodden people, And can we please not hand more power to the absolute worst dingbats our society has on offer?
Integral can help here. The integral left has an emerging vision for a socially just and anti-rivalrous economic system that can help ContraPoints extend her critique of capitalism beyond voting labor, tweeting radically, and eating more vegetables, and into the realm of viable economic alternatives. And finally, Natalie Wynn obviously comes from an affinity for philosophy, but she dropped out of a philosophy PhD and now calls herself an ex-philosopher. And so I wonder whether getting nerdy on integral philosophy, and I'm sneakily going to add meta-modernism in here too, might, just might, rekindle her love of philosophy through philosophers who are increasingly not all men, not all white, and not all old or dead. So Natalie, gorge, let's talk. Whether or not you've heard of integral philosophy, you are already in excellent integral company. Rebel Wisdom wants to interview you. Brent Cooper lists you as a member of the intellectual light web. Jeremy Johnson's YouTube channel links to you, and I would love to collaborate with you. And so, indeed,
let's get started.
And that was How ContraPoints Embodies Integral Philosophy, as brought to you by the Infinite Lunchbox. If you are intrigued by the possibility of a collaboration between me and Natalie, ask her to be in touch. If you're new here, take the opportunity to peruse what else the Infinite Lunchbox has on offer. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, share, support, and be in touch. Thank you.